Hi, in this video, we're going to be discussing a paper written by Gregory, Walton, and Geoffrey Cohen entitled, "A Brief Social Belonging Intervention Improves the Academic and Health Outcomes of Minority Students." In this paper, the researchers try to see if increasing a minority student's sense of belonging can also increase their academic performance. To answer this question, the researchers recruited a group of first-year college students. Half of this group was African American students, and the other half were European American students. In the experiment, the researchers had the students read a survey of upperclassmen that essentially showed that the transition to college is a tough one and many people struggle with it. Also, the researchers asked the students to write about their own transition experiences and record them for use by future first-year students. 3 years later, the researchers found that the African American students that had participated in the study had significantly higher GPAs than African American students that had not participated in the study. In addition, the European American students that had participated in the study had GPAs that were essentially the same as European American students that had not participated in the study. Therefore, it seems that the intervention specifically increased the academic outcomes for the African American students. Next, you're going to watch a few short interviews of 2 college professors and 2 graduate students sharing their thoughts on the paper. Their thoughts and opinions are meant to serve as a springboard for the discussions that you will have with other MOOC participants in the discussion forums.
One of the first things that jumped out to me was that this was a big coincidence that I was actually reading this paper, because I had heard at least 3 or 4 other professors talk about these targeted interventions, specifically to think about how science is a growth kind of learning mechanism, and that failure is completely par for the course. And at least those 3 professors were over the summer trying to think about how to incorporate this into their own programs. And so it struck me that this must be a really hot topic. And then the immediate other thing that struck me was how we were going to implement this into a physics type of curriculum, because that seems pretty touchy-feely, you know? So I'm still struggling with how we're going to actually do this. So for me, I definitely felt like I didn't belong in any of the classes that involved science as an undergrad or even in high school, because you're right, I was a woman. We were also, I'm from Montana, we were pretty isolated, and so I had never seen anybody like me ever attempt this type of career. And so all along my path, even kind of today, I feel like I don't belong. And at least at the beginning, I would take every little failure as a sign that I wasn't cut out for it and that I didn't belong. And so one of the things now that I've kind of made it, and I'm walking the walk of a scientist, is that I emphasize to people that if you fail, it is not a sign that you don't belong. All that you really need to do in order to be a scientist is to just do the science, and that sometimes you're going to fail, and that's not a sign of anything. I was sure that every bad sign was a sign that I was going to fail, but then every so often a good sign would say, well, maybe I do belong. So I was taking signs from everywhere. I think the thing that finally helped was, ironically, this sense of belonging. So I got into grad school, and about half the folks in grad school were women, and the ladies who were sort of okay to complain. So they would say, I don't understand how to do this problem, and I also didn't understand how to do the problem. So I loved the idea that I finally found my group and my tribe, and so I felt a huge sense of belonging that carried me the rest of the way through. And that's another thing that really resonated with this paper, was that that touchy-feely sense of belonging. It was critical for me personally to be able to succeed. Yeah, I mean, I can be really specific, but I happen to know quantum really backwards and forwards, and so nobody else did in my group, and I felt so proud of myself that I could teach everybody else these quantum mechanical things, and that I took as a sign that maybe I do belong. And then on the other hand, I struggled painfully, and still do, with anything involving instrumentation. So when you talk to me about a radio receiver that's supposed to receive beautiful signals from, the beginning of the universe, and yet you're talking to me about the capacitors and whatever, I still don't get it. And so I had to be carried by my group along. And, I did take that as a sign that I shouldn't belong, but I think another thing you have to think about is that even though you may feel what your belongingness, and that may change with time, the whole point of working towards something difficult, like a degree, is that you just do the work despite how you feel, and your group can help you with that. I have 2 ideas, but I'm always open to hear more. One is at the first lecture of the class, you try and set the stage for the whole class and tell people their expectations. And I think one of the things I want to emphasize during the first class are 2 things. One, that you're going to fail, and that's not a sign of anything. So I'm going to give people that sort of expectation that you don't need to be able to understand things right out of the bat. Physics is hard. In order for you to understand things in physics, you're going to struggle with it, and that's totally normal. It happens to everybody. It happens to me. But that's kind of preachy, and so that doesn't get at the idea of this unaware intervention that is really supposed to resonate and really supposed to affect the change. So I think I want to emphasize that students should work in groups, because that facilitates this sense of belonging. I mean, you're seeing, as you work in a group, other people who also don't understand. So I think that is something that I want to really make clear, that you need to find yourself a group, and you shouldn't go alone. Nobody ever, should go alone, go this physics path alone.
So in reading the paper, one of the things I was really surprised at how effective the intervention technique really was in terms of the GPA. So having similar experiences, I guess, as an undergrad, where you would first start college and not necessarily know how you fit in or how well you're going to do in a new environment, I think having those techniques where you don't internalize them or figure that you're the only person who's having trouble in this subject, or you're the only person who's experienced this situation before. And so having an intervention where you demonstrate it to other people as they come in as a collective, that they're able to see that others experience those same scenarios, and that their adversity is not attributed to unique factors of their gender or race. And I think that allowed them to not internalize that message, and then to not be as successful in their undergraduate career. So I went to undergrad at historically black university, Florida A&M University. And so there was not necessarily the same scenario of being isolated as far as my race. But what we did do was, for the ones who were engineering majors, they actually had an intervention program where they had us in a minority engineering program, where we started off in some of the same physics classes, the same calculus classes. We had study halls together, and it built a sense of community. So that way you knew other people in your class. You had a chance to work in teams and peer groups in terms of learning the material. I think it was important that people recognize that we needed to make sure that we were successful. And so there were efforts in terms of making sure that we were prepared for class. We started studying. They had us with what they considered some of their better professors in those classes. And they really made a specific effort to focus on science and engineering and being productive in those majors. I did my graduate work at Georgia Tech. And so that transition was obviously different, going to a predominantly white institution. And so, as it turned out, there was actually a good critical mass of black students who were there already. And so there was a transition program that allowed new incoming graduate students to meet graduate students who were already there at Georgia Tech. And they essentially told us, all the ins and outs and things that would help us to be successful. They, told us about, what it would be like to take your qualifying exam. They told us how classes would run. They helped us to meet each other and again, form study groups. And I think that's the one thing that I would say is consistent, that you don't want to feel isolated. And so I think if you can make those connections, that there are others who may have similar adversity, and you can discuss those opportunities of how to be successful, I think that helps. So my experience of coming to Vanderbilt, I actually found it to be very collegial. And I think some of the things that I probably internalized or worried about was being not only just the one black professor who was tenured track that was here. It's also my age too. So it was kind of a combination of being both young and African American. And so I did wonder how I would be perceived in the classroom. I did wonder whether or not students would have some aversion or some reaction that I was in front of the classroom talking about this material. So I tried to make sure that I knew my material. I tried to make sure that I was prepared for lectures. Unfortunately, I don't think I ever really experienced that case where someone actually really just tested my authority or knowledge in the classroom to that extent. But I did worry about it. I did think that could happen. And I do know colleagues at other places and scenarios where that has happened. And I always wondered what I would do or how you would handle that scenario. And so what tends to happen is if it comes up, you end up being unprepared and wondering how you would react to it. And it's almost stunning to the standpoint of saying, well, wow, it just happened. I can't believe that would happen. And so I think the initial reaction is one where you may try to minimize it in that classroom setting. But I think what would happen over time is that you would replay that instance or that occurrence again and again. And so similar to the paper, I think, the students would have an incident that would happen and they would replay it over and over again. Or if I had that experience in a classroom where my race was, I thought was the factor of why a student had openly said, well, how could you know what that is, or something to those effects. I think over time, I think that is what would be the worst outcome, that you allow it to fester, you allow it to go forward and ultimately hurt your own performance because you lose confidence later on. But the initial incident's probably harder to quantify in terms of that, seeing it manifest in terms of later on. So I think one of the things that I have benefited from was having good mentors that are available to talk about those issues, to see how to deal with it, or even having people who are similar in stage of their career. So I know a number of black faculty who are at different engineering schools. And so even though we may be the only one or ones or few that are at our institution, at least collectively that gives us a chance to talk about our shared experiences. And if something happened to one of us, we could discuss it and figure out, well, how would you have handled that in your own situation? So I think some of the techniques that we kind of naturally did, and probably learning from our days at Georgia Tech or undergrad that we met, having a good sense of community, a good sense of belonging to a group, gives you a chance to have a good support network. And I think that's important for being resilient. I know we have the strict honor code policy, and you don't want to have co-authored homeworks and single solutions and that sort of thing. But I try to encourage people to study together. I try to encourage people to take advantage of those discussions with their classmates. Some of the classes I've taught would have small team-based activities or labs, and so you get a chance to learn from each other that way. I think having other resources that are available on campus, I try to promote those. On campus we have tutoring sessions for a lot of our basic math and science classes and introductory engineering courses. And so I try to tell students about those opportunities as well. It's always difficult when you say, yes, here's a study hall or a tutoring session, and you don't want to make the students feel like that they're not adequate, but you're trying to make them aware of the resources that are available to them, that if they need help or if they don't quite understand a concept, There's tutoring that's available. I have office hours. My TAs have office hours, and don't wait until the last minute to get your questions answered and to figure out where that lack of understanding has happened. I do think showing a genuine interest in people and talking to them about whether it's a classwork or finding out more about them, making them feel welcome in the classroom, making them feel that they can succeed, and giving words of encouragement. I think that's in general. You can do that type of a technique with anybody. And if you decide that you want to make sure that you provide those types of messages to women and Black and Hispanic students that are in your class, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I don't recall a time, if there ever was one, when I questioned whether or not I belonged in college or, social groups in college or academic groups. Actually, that might be a different thought. Socially, I certainly never struggled. Never had a feeling like I didn't have a group to go to. That's largely in part because I was heavily involved in extracurricular activities. I was in sports, and I was also in some academic organizations like the Business Student Association. I was in some ethnic organizations. Actually, the Latino Business Association, Student Association was one of those. I was also in a music group and in a band and geology club, which eventually became a major for me. And so I had a lot of people to reach out to in a social aspect and many groups to socialize with. So I never felt like I didn't have a place. Some days I felt more strongly tied to some groups than others, but there was also enough activity. There was always enough activity that I felt like I was in the right place. I felt comfortable. But I think an unfortunate and unintended consequence of this involvement was that my academic performance suffered a bit because I was so heavily involved that it took a lot of time away from studying. And yeah, I saw a decline in my grades and in my performance. And in retrospect, I think I tried to do too much in too little time. And while at the time that was fun and it felt great and I was in an awesome place, looking back, I certainly did not perform academically to the level that I know I can. And again, unintended consequence of trying to find the right place. And it's definitely stirred up the gears in my head, thinking about, can I say anything? Can I do anything to help them transition, especially the newer students or incoming students? I don't think I would attempt to do anything addressing a class or at the beginning of the semester with my entire class, but I do think I could come up with a way. I haven't yet, but I think I can come up with a way to help my students feel comfortable in a one-on-one situation. So when they come to me with questions or issues, perhaps share a little bit of my experience. I struggled through college and in the academic environment, and I certainly wish I had reached out more often to not just colleagues and classmates, but teachers and TAs, and that's something that I would definitely encourage. I think it's a healthy thing to do, and I think I will try to be better about facilitating a comfortable environment for them to ask questions and to really, express any concerns they have. So I think it's important to reach out and maybe change the mentality that, hey, just because you're not performing at what you think should be your best level doesn't mean you can't, or that you're not as smart as you thought, or whatever else might come with those thoughts.
Yeah, in a way, it's almost like that's what being involved academically would be. Like, you can be involved socially and have a bunch of
Yeah.
results, but being involved academically means, like, you're going to office hours,
Yeah.
you're harassing your TAs to get your
Right.
questions answered, because that shows that, you're care and your concern for the material. And your
Yeah,
grade.
that's an excellent point. Yeah, I will encourage my students to be involved both socially and academically. It's definitely something I've thought rigorously about before, but certainly now will.
The one point that the paper made that really resonated with me is the fact that social belonging is, at least it inferred to me that it's the mental state of the person and how the person perceives their surroundings and how they perceive what other thinks of them. And in terms of bringing that to a personal level, when I immigrated here, we moved from Haiti to Massachusetts, where you're coming from a country, after 200 years of independence, where everybody looks the same, and now you're in a country where not everybody looks like you, and you might be lucky if you see somebody else that look like you in 5 days. So, but I had already known what I was coming into, so that was a little bit of a challenge. It was a new thing, just being excited about meeting new people and different culture. But then when you add the language barrier, which is very, very tough because you can't communicate even though you want to speak to somebody, then it gives you different mental states where oh my goodness, you're frustrated, you don't know how to approach the person, you don't know how to communicate, and maybe that person doesn't like you because you sound this way. So going into high school, it was very difficult because you have sports, people play sports, and they're always talking to each other, even using a locker and doing the combination. If you can't use it right, you can't even ask somebody for help because you don't know how to do it. And what I used to do is, at a certain point, I would isolate myself, thinking that if I isolate myself and just study harder, then when I get the language down pat, then I'll go ahead and start making friends. But early on, I realized that while everybody would be having good conversation and good time together, I would just be sitting by myself. And I felt like, isolating myself wasn't the right thing to do. So I went, the next time I went inside the cafeteria, I just sat with everybody. It was only loudness around me because I had no idea what was going on. But, over time, I would catch certain words and certain phrases. And, it allowed me to also see that, some of the girls that I thought, wouldn't talk to me just because, it's not that, it's just they don't know how to communicate with me as well. So, just like smiling and sitting there and picking up certain words, took me out of my isolation and put me dead in the center. And, next thing you know, I was playing field hockey, softball and basketball and traveling with them. And, now I had a group of friends. But if I had isolated myself and think that, until I speak, I'm not gonna go to them, then it would have been very different. And we probably would have never talked, even though my English was still not great, but we were able to communicate with. For like one of the class, we had a group, and I'm not sure if it's because I didn't talk to them more or they didn't talk to me, but since, when I would speak, when the professor would be like, introduce yourself, I thought that people would know that, I'm not from here. But with the group, they would have meetings and they would exclude me, and maybe they thought that, oh, okay, well, she can't be in the presentation anyway. We're not going to let her talk anyway, so why have her come to the meeting? It doesn't matter. Maybe that was what's going on, but my perceptions of how they saw me, whether or not it was my language barrier, it bothered me to the point where, I would strive to, speak better, where you wouldn't have to hear no accent. And then where I would try to, study more because maybe they think I'm stupid because, I don't understand what's going on, or, because of the race as well. With all of this, I would be crying every Friday night, trying to get the homework done, and also, wondering what is wrong with me. And I would be talking to my dad, and my dad said to me one time, don't worry about whether people think you're stupid or whether they think that, you're stupid because of your accent, of your color. Just learn what they know. Once you know what they know, it doesn't matter what they think, you're at the same level with them. And with that thought, I'm like, oh, maybe I should do that. So then, I had to not see myself and perceive myself as somebody that is not liked and just think that, oh, I just need to learn what they know. Not worry about whether they like me or not. And that worked very well where we talked more, because when I would ask them to explain, they'd be like, oh, well, what do you mean by that? Well, no matter if they're condescending or not, they would still explain. And so then I would know more. And then, it would just generate conversations and put me in a better place. You start forming relationships with people that you perceived didn't like you at any levels at all. But, it's just that I feel like the way I perceived it, since I changed it, it made me more receptive towards the other person, or vice versa as well. And I think that really brought out the message that the paper is saying, that social belonging will affect your academic life. And just knowing that other people have had the challenges, or that you can get through it, gives you that sense that, oh, I can do this. It's going to be tough. I just have to go through the rough patch and just do it. And then so when I read the paper, I've taught a couple of times, and I've always thought about using this approach whenever I become a professor. But when I read the paper, it really cemented that in my mind, that there's something that I should do, because I believe that the first impression always counts. So also in a classroom, I remember in my first year of college, there's one computer science professor said to me that, look to your left, look to your right, look to your left, look to your right. The person beside you is not going to make it to the next round. And that class was the most challenging, I think, now thinking about it, not because really we couldn't push through and just like have the drive, but then that mental state that he set up in the beginning, it was already tells you, oh, it's okay, one of you is not going to make it. And it set up also a competitiveness that probably allowed, like 50% of the class to fail. So getting all that into my thoughts and thinking about the paper, I think that the first 10 minutes of the class, I would have a brief introduction of myself so that they could see who I am as a professor and also as a person, since as a professor, you're already intimidating enough. And just let them know that I am there for them to help them academically, which means that, they will have various challenges coming into this new culture, meeting different people, not have your parents being there all the time for support. These challenges, whether they are like social, also will seep into the academic life if they don't, seek the help that they need and talk to people about what they're facing or where they need the help. So I would tell them that I'm here for you for this class. And, whatever problems you have to come to me earlier enough so that I could help you, and at the last minute where we would have to piece things together. And do it in a way where it would also be fair to your classmates, so that, if I give a deadline, then I'm not making favoritism and giving you an exception where somebody else could have also had the same exception, but then they're like, oh, okay, well, I already missed the deadline, I'm just gonna leave it alone. So in terms of like me being a stickler for rules, but also being a fair professor and somebody that they could talk to, that would always help them succeed, especially in their first semester.